Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on what must be one of the hottest days of the year so far. I think we're all sweltering, so hope everyone is managing to keep cool. But thank you for joining us. I'm Carly from the main group, and really delighted to be joined today by Lee. Lee is the amazing founder of Changing Hearts and Mind. Hi, Lee. It's good to see you.
Hello, good to see you, Carly.
Thank you for joining us. I know you're a busy day today, so thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. So yes, my name's Lee. My pronouns are he, him, they. I'm a queer man, and my business that Carly refers to is Changing Hearts and Minds Consulting Limited.
And Lee, it'd be great actually if you wanted to start by telling us just a little bit about Changing Hearts and Mind and your journey, and what sort of consultancy work you do, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So the focus is for the LGBTQIA communities, but it's not just, we'll look at any diverse grouping that you need support in looking at allyship for. So the main offering we have is around creating allies within your workplace, which leads to a better, inclusive, more productive workforce. And then that also generates social impact because your employees go and teach their families, their neighbors, their communities also how to be allies. But I have a whole list of service offerings, which includes looking at how to connect with LGBT communities, how to support and look at your end-to-end recruitment process or your employee life cycle, removing barriers, looking at making sure that it's inclusive, and really helping in terms of like with recruitment, with retention. I have a mentoring opportunity as well, and that includes reverse mentoring, which I think is really important for Gen Zs to be able to speak with your leaders about what's important to them.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lee. And I know that's just a snapshot of what you do, and actually we can share with all our delegates today more information on your website, which is just so powerful and really amazing work that you're doing. But given that it is Pride Month, I can't think of a better guest than Lee today to be sort of guiding us through EDI, particularly around allyship within the LGBTQIA communities. But before we dive in, just a little bit of housekeeping. We are going to be running for just around about 30 to 40 minutes roughly today, as usual. Just to say, if you do need to step out early, don't worry, because we always have a recording which you'll get sent afterwards, and you can also share that with any of your colleagues as well, if that's relevant. We love to keep it interactive, so please do see the chat function here. I'm just going to get everyone started by saying hello. Please feel free to introduce yourselves. And yeah, as I say, if we've got questions as we go along, I can put them to Lee for you, and I'm sure he'll be really generous in answering them for you. And we've also got a poll, because we do love a poll. And today's poll is, we're asking you how confident you are about your current workplace EDI policies. Now, interestingly, the CIPDs Inclusion at Work report, which was only last year, actually concluded that just under half of leaders of companies admitted that they didn't have a ready EDI strategy. And in fact, that the majority of the EDI work that they were doing was either purely or mostly reactive. So I think it's, there's nothing to be ashamed of here. A lot of us know that there's work to be done, and that's why we are hoping to upskill today. But the poll is anonymous, but it would be so useful just to get a feel for the room and just to see where everyone is in terms of these EDI policies. So thank you for filling in the poll, and I will refer back to that later. But for now, I think it's clear to say that since our last session 12 months ago, there has been both progression and, unfortunately, regression. So, Lee, I'm going to hand back over to you to just talk us through a little bit about that, please.
I'd like to say that it's been a good year for the LGBTQIA communities, but unfortunately, this has been a really tough year. And that does also sort of cover globally, not just in the UK. In terms of regression, so sadly, we've seen a real backlash against our trans and non-binary communities here, the US, and them being villainized and made out to be predators, which they are not. They're the most vulnerable in our community, and also such a minority. There's such a small percentage of trans and non-binary people. But it changes in legislation, especially in the US, where
I think Lee has just had a bit of a technical glitch there, so I'm sure he'll be rejoining us shortly. But just to pick up where Lee left off, I think Lee's back in the room now. And just waiting for him to come live. Sorry about this, everybody, just a slight technical glitch. So Lee, we can see your screen, but we can't see you. Can you hear us? There we are. So just while we are waiting for Lee to rejoin, I understand that there has been, as Lee was explaining, there's been sort of some negative media narrative that we've seen globally, which has been regressive rather than progressive, sadly, in the last 12 months. And I know Lee's going to share a little bit more with us about that as soon as we can get him back in the room. Thank you for bearing with us. And while we are waiting for Lee, I'm just going to have a little bit of an update for us on the poll. Oh, okay, Lee, we've got you back again. Hello.
I don't really know what happened, to be fair, but yes, I'm back. Sorry about that.
No, not at all.
So I was just saying about the backlash against probably the most vulnerable within the LGBTQIA communities, even as far as the US in certain states now making it illegal to perform as a drag queen. That's how much regression is going on over in the US, and hopefully that won't follow here. But just looking at outside and looking at the rest of the world, Uganda, as an example, recently put through an anti-homosexual act, and now in Uganda it's illegal to be queer, to be LGBTQIA. So much so that if you are caught doing anything that demonstrates that you are from our communities, you face the death penalty. That's as extreme as it is. And the first thing they do is take people into, they're imprisoned and they go through conversion therapy. If that doesn't work, they are then castrated, and then the next step is just to be murdered. So, really,
it's absolutely shocking. And Lee, I think what's really important is that you're able to help us raise awareness of that, because these are things that I think a lot of people are unaware that's going on. It's going on under the radar, and so the more people that are aware of this, and then I think it will just be more than beneficial. So thank you for sharing that.
So lots of people are fleeing from Uganda to Kenya. In Kenya, there's huge refugee camps. On those camps, again, the queer community are being victims of assault, abuse. Trans people are being stripped naked in the refugee camps to show the gender at birth. It's just really, when there's horrendous monstrosities happening around the world. And I have been fortunate to speak with people in Uganda and also Kenya. And I've now set a crowdfunder going. So if you would like more details on how you can support, then connect with me and I'll share that with you.
Thank you.
So lots of regression. Progression, though, let's look at some positive stuff.
Let's look at some positives. I mean, that's all pretty shocking stuff, but it would be great to hear, what some positive movements we've seen as well.
I think the most exciting for me is, well, firstly, the census that was carried out for the first time actually included sexuality and looked at LGBTQIA people being able to identify themselves in the census. Mm-hmm. That showed that 3% of the UK population are gay, and 1% are trans or non-binary. I'm sure that number is actually a lot higher, but many people are afraid to come out. But the fact that we now have some data that's a real win. And then another survey that was conducted by Stonewall, which is a leading charity for the LGBT communities. Also, the findings from that demonstrated that with Gen Zs, when questioned about their sexuality, only 78% identified as heterosexual. So 22% identified as something else. And that's a huge shift, which means Gen Zs are more comfortable to be non-binary, to be more fluid, to talk about their sexuality and gender than ever before. If you look at like the baby boomers, only 2% identified as something else. So, which will lead to, I feel, a more inclusive world, and certainly a workplace as Gen Zs get older. So that's something to get very excited about.
And that is a really huge shift, isn't it? I mean, when you look at those stats and how much that's different, like you say, it makes you see that people are more comfortable to be open about how they're identifying, which as you can only be improvement.
Yeah. And then if we look at like Europe, so there has been some countries that have taken huge steps to drive equality. There's a Rainbow Europe Index, which shows which countries in Europe are leading the way, and it's a full kind of review of their practices and their laws and how they're operating. And some countries have scored really highly, like Finland, Spain, and the reason for that is that they have put laws in place now to protect all of our communities, the more marginalized ones, and not just around equality, but also looking at how to ensure that things like verbal harassment are seen as something that should be illegal. So there's been massive steps forward in some European countries. Sadly, I mean, the UK for years was number one in that league table, and it slipped down. It was number 14 last year. I think it's number 17 this year.
So not even in the top 10 anymore, Lee.
It's fallen. It's really shocking that the UK, which has always felt like a place of inclusion, is no longer seen that way by people looking in and reviewing and looking at our practices and the way we're running the country. It's just and the main reason for the falling down the league table is the backlash against the trans community.
Sorry, everybody. I think we've just lost Lee again, but it looks like he is rejoining us. Afraid we seem to be having a few technical glitches today, but thanks for bearing with us. And again, just while we are waiting for Lee to re-enter, it sounds like it is, interestingly, it is the trans and non-binary communities that are increasingly marginalised, and that is the reason why the UK has slipped down in these sort of league table rankings, which is really interesting. So I know Lee's going to tell us more about that. Here we go. Thank you, Lee.
I apologise. There seems to be an issue with my laptop because it's plugged in and charging, but it's for some reason the battery just is.
Probably can't cope with the heat today or something like that. No worries at all.
That gave everybody a bit of a high-level overview of some of the positives since we last spoke that's happened in the last year, and then some of the stuff that's going on in the world that's demonstrating the backlash and a real regression and just scary times for the LGBTQIA communities, and a reminder that what we have is not a given and things are ever changing. So we might have laws in place, but they can come and go quite easily dependent on who is leading the country. If we don't remember our history, then it will repeat itself. And so I'm trying to help my communities as well realise that, and all rally around, because it's great to have allies from outside of the community, but we also need to have allies within the community, because there's lots of communities in the LGBTQIA community, and we need to be better allies to one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, Lee, before we get on to the rest of the topics, it would be really useful if you could tell us a bit about how HR communities can encourage allyship within their organisations.
So there's many ways. I think the first thing to be mindful of is that tokenism is now seen through by the LGBTQIA communities. So organisations waving rainbow flags, for example, at Pride, but not actually doing anything to support what Pride is all about, will get called out. And we're seeing more and more of that because of socials, Twitter, for example, people posting on Twitter and naming and shaming. So don't do anything like that unless you've got some substance to it.
Yeah, so it's got to go through the fabric of your policies and your organisational culture, rather than just here's a nice banner at Pride Month and then forgetting about it after that.
100%.
Really good point.
And in terms of allyship, I think one real thing that all organisations should do is, even if there's no representation within senior leadership of anybody from the LGBTQIA communities, there needs to be visibility of allyship. So people within the leadership team need to be openly supportive, amplifying the voices of those from our communities, speaking on our behalf, and doing things that demonstrate support. So helping LGBT charities, for example, or setting up fundraisers or corporate sponsorship to help those that really are more marginalized and really struggling at the moment. There's so many things that you can do for allyship. If you need to look at your policies and everything that you have in place, the language that's being used, is it inclusive? Does it reflect now that pronouns have changed, that that needs to be included in your policies as well.
Let's talk a bit about pronouns, Lee, if we can, because I know it's a topic we wanted to cover today, and I know you touched on it at our last session a year ago, but it would be really great, just because I think so many people still are confused about wanting to get pronouns right and not knowing how to do that. So would you mind walking us a quick run through on pronoun best practice?
Sure. So, well, firstly, the best way to ensure you don't misgender somebody is to ask them their pronouns. Do introduce yourself with your pronouns. I say my pronouns are he, him, theirs, which people may think, well, what does that mean exactly? I would always encourage people to go away and do their own research as well, not to expect to be told. But if you're interested, then do the research, find out for yourself, show that you're an ally by actually going away and reading up on things or following influencers. But for me, with my pronouns, I guess the gender spectrum is huge. I think looking at it as male and female, man and woman, non-binary trans people have always been here. Like if you look back in history, if you look back at around the world, there's always been a presence. So
just while Lee is coming in and out of the room again, just to recap on that, I think it's something that's really important that Lee's just shared with us, is to introduce yourself with your pronouns at every meeting. And I know that's not something that is particularly happening 100% of the time, but it is something which, if you want to support allyship, is really powerful, to start every meeting with your pronouns, and also putting them on your LinkedIn profile, adding them to your email signature, because it can really help to ensure that people can be getting it right. I think, essentially speaking, people want to get this right, as much as possible. People, majority of the time, have a desire to get it right, but sometimes it's a fear around getting it wrong that stops people from asking the right questions.
Sorry, I'm back again.
Thanks, Lee. No worries at all. I was just giving a bit of a recap on, that most people want to get it right when it comes to pronouns, but sometimes they're afraid to ask the questions or afraid to get it wrong. But generally speaking, I think, is it fair to say that if someone accidentally makes a mistake on a pronoun, that people won't hold that against them as long as they take it on board?
Yeah, misgendering happens, and that's why it is best to ask somebody their pronouns. But if you do misgender somebody, then that is forgiven, of course, but you need then to move on from that by actually using correct pronouns. So I wouldn't get too caught up in, if you do misgender, that's going to be really hurtful. I mean, it is for some, but I think move on and then move forward with actually getting it right from there on in.
Getting it right. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Another thing that we thought would be really useful to touch on today, Lee, is some common mistakes that employers and HR teams are still making, and the best way to avoid them, if you've got any examples of that.
So I think looking at like holistically, what's in place within the organization, like how are you really inclusive? From things like having toilets that are gender neutral, having sanitary bins in both toilets, male, female, and hopefully gender neutral toilets. So little basic steps like that, by having pronouns, putting pronouns on signatures, having pronouns on encouraging staff to put it on their socials, introducing their pronouns at meetings. But then more complex things as well around like the benefits that you're offering. Are those benefits inclusive for the LGBTQIA communities? Looking at for trans people, if they want to transition, then is there support with that? I know some organizations do capture that within their private healthcare schemes. Policies and procedures around bullying and harassment need to be reviewed and make sure that they are being delivered, and that line managers are getting training on how to spot that. But even better is delivering inclusion training.
Yeah, it's such an important point, because I know you talk on your website, Lee, a lot about people feeling safe and having the right to feel safe and secure. And I think it's only when organisations have these policies in place that support that people really will genuinely be able to feel that way.
Yeah, it is. So everybody wants to be able to bring their authentic self to work, yet 1 in 5 LGBT people are not out at work and do fear discrimination. So there's still a lot of work to do to really provide workplaces that feel like it's safe to be yourself. And when people are their whole authentic self, then they're far more productive. So why would you want to dim somebody's light, let them shine as bright as they can and be as productive as they can? But it does take really looking at objectively what you're currently doing, and are some of the ways that you're trying to drive inclusion more around it's okay, you can be one of us, because that's a mistake organizations make. But people from more diverse groupings don't necessarily want to be one of you. They want to be their authentic self, and they want to be valued and appreciated for being that. So I know that sometimes it may feel like, well, we're inviting everybody to this party or whatever, but then are you considering that party, is it in a place that's safe for LGBT people? Will they feel that they can come and be relaxed and feel safe and secure? Is the venue, is it somewhere that they would want to visit? So there's just ways of thinking about your team as a whole, and that goes for all diverse groups, really, celebrating significant events within the LGBT calendar, but actually doing something rather than just celebrating, putting some meaningful actions in place that show that you are truly an ally.
Yeah, and I love that, because I think that, it changes it from just equality to equity as well. And I think that is something which is really important for us to bear in mind. And then the belonging, I always like to add the B on to the end of EDI, because I think belonging is equally important. And so I think everything you've shared there is really, really powerful, and hopefully stuff we can put into practice. Thank you. I was really interested actually in what lessons we can learn from these countries that are doing well in the Rainbow Index and better than us, and what sort of things HR teams can take away from that.
So if you look at the ones who've now sat at the top of the league table, countries like Finland, Spain, looking at your policies and practices and maybe reflecting what those countries are doing, because given that the UK have started to fall down the league table, why wait for the UK government to do something and follow then what legislation is put in place? Do something now that actually reflects what these countries are doing. So certainly looking at, it's really important to welcome trans, non-binary people into your organization and have the correct policies in place to make sure that they feel safe and that they are safe.
It's such an interesting point, actually, I think, where you talk about how we shouldn't have to wait for the government to make these changes and then put in place processes and policies reactively, because actually it could be a long time that we're waiting. And then I think so often it seems like it's a tick box rather than a genuine part of an organization's culture.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it does. That's how it appears to people from diverse groups, that it then becomes a tick box exercise rather than something that's become that business and its values, and that's what the company truly believes. And sometimes I think with ED&I, there's a business agenda, and that's the agenda that leads ED&I, but actually it should be listening more to your people from diverse groupings and understanding what they need, what they want, and having that on the agenda.
Absolutely. And actually, I'm going to take it back to the poll there, Lee, because I think it's really interesting just to give everyone a bit of an update on the poll. So about 50% of us are saying that in terms of our EDI policies in the workplace, that we're feeling like we're just about there, but there's room for improvement. And we've got 33% of our attendees saying that they're really confident they're getting it right, which is brilliant and sounds like they've done a lot of the work on getting these policies right. And 16% of people are very openly admitting that there's work to be done, which absolutely mirrors this CIPD survey. And I think it's absolutely fair to say that not 100% of organisations are getting it right, and that's what sessions like this and organisations like yours, Lee, are there to support, help these companies to upskill in.
Absolutely, and when companies take action to address what's not right, one of the first things an organization should do is actually ask people from those communities, understanding your data, like how many people within your workforce are from diverse groupings, which diverse groupings, because if you look at the overall employee demographics, if there's few that are saying that they're LGBT, then is it that you're not hiring LGBT people, or that they don't feel comfortable to come out at work? So one of the things I do is I work with charities, because a proportion of my profits goes to LGBT charities, especially the ones that are supporting those most marginalized. But so having that conversation with their customers, their beneficiaries, around what would you like to see in the workplace, as opposed to saying this is what we are offering, because that might feel like it's the right thing, but it might not be the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting. Before we finish up today, I just wanted to remind everybody that we are offering a complimentary light EDI audit to all of our attendees today. So feel free to get in touch with myself or Lee. We'll also be reaching out to you to ask you how you want to arrange that. And I think it's all fair to say that we all know that there is some work to be done. But the main thing is, everyone who's here today wants to get it right, and that's really powerful. Lee, we've also got a question in the chat, which I'm just going to read to you. I don't know if you can see it here, but we've had a note saying, hi, do you know which specific laws or policies have been passed which have resulted in a backlash for trans people? So I don't know if that's something you want to pick up now or pick up with George afterwards. I think Lee's just checking this. Yeah, you're back. You didn't even leave that time.
Oh,
so.
that's good. I mean, there are a few, and I'm quite happy to pick that up afterwards. I mean,
yeah.
But it ranges from everything from schools and from young people now changed in legislation around same-sex schools and gender identification, referencing somebody's gender in schools, up to the rights of trans people for just basic healthcare and support. But I'm quite happy to give details of specifics around that.
Thank you. We can put you in touch after the event. Also, just to say, if there's anything that we haven't covered today, we've got a few more minutes if anyone did want to pop anything into the chat, and we can cover that off. And whilst anyone's thinking about that, Lee, was there anything else that you thought it was important to share today?
Just I think for allies out there, thank you for your allyship. We're a very small minority, and alone our voices are often not heard. So we need allies. We need you to amplify our voices, to stand in solidarity. So thank you for that. Please enjoy Pride. It's Pride Month, and it's great to wave the rainbow flags and to enjoy the celebrations, because it is a celebration as well as protest. But think of what are you specifically doing to help communities like trans communities, intersex communities, ones that are often neglected. How are you addressing non-binary within your business and getting leadership buy-in around non-binary? Also looking at ways that you can give back, corporate sponsorship, volunteering, so just doing things that will make a difference. So I would enjoy, but just remember that there's a lot of work to be done. Hate crime against people that are gay rose from 2021 to 2022 by 47%. Towards trans people, it increased by 58%. So it's really shocking facts, and it's true. Like hate crime is rising. We need organisations to promote allyship, to encourage social impact, for that to spread outside of their businesses. So yeah, there's lots of things you can do, but do remember as well to enjoy Pride and talk about on your socials what you're doing, because other organisations will see that, the LGBT communities will see that. It will help us to feel that you value us and that you want us to be included.
Thank you, Lee. This is really powerful stuff. And yeah, I think it's really important, like you say, to remember that Pride is a celebration of how far we've come, but equally that throughout the year, it's about remembering what we can continue to do to fight the regression as well. And thank you so much for your time today. I know you're a very busy man with all the work that you're doing, and so we really appreciate your insights.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. I've just seen that George has put another question on. George, if it's all right with you, I'm going to put you in touch with Lee afterwards, just because we are running out of time, but I'm sure Lee will be very generous in answering your question.
Thanks.
Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks so much for joining us, Lee.
Bye.
Bye-bye all.